Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure and honor to be part of Riga Aviation Forum 2020 and to have a presentation on unmanned aircraft systems. I think it's quite clear that technologies are getting better and better every day, and when it comes to the unmanned aircraft systems, they are becoming more widely available, more affordable, and more capable. We can see that both recreational and commercial interest for unmanned aircraft systems has a steady increase over the last decade, and the numbers are still rising. As well as demand of more and more sophisticated operations. But when it comes to the regulatory framework enabling such operations, unfortunately, the regulations are a little bit behind all these technologies. And during this presentation, I will try to explain you and highlight why. And for that, we need to go a little bit in history. Even though the history for unmanned aircraft systems goes at least a century ago, the real rapid growth started approximately a decade ago when first multirotors were adopted for hobby use to take beautiful photos and videos. They became very simple to be operated, and since then they've been developing, and now we are even talking about IFR international operations or transportation of people. But today I will try to focus more on our actual situation right now. And the hot topic right now is so-called BVLOS, or Beyond Visual Line of Sight operations. And all these sophisticated systems capable of providing such operations do not require very serious training or instructions how to use them. And for recreational users, that's great. They can feel like birds, fly wherever they want, freedom, good. For commercial users, they can do their daily tasks or new job opportunities and more efficiently and to save money. But the legal framework is not enabling such operations with open arms, simply because they raise new challenges in terms of safety, security, privacy, and environmental aspects. Different entities have expressed growing concerns that new or expanded operations may have privacy and security risks. And if we look at the two categories of users, first, those are users without any malicious intent. They simply don't know how to use unmanned aircraft, or their reckless flying may cause a threat to security and safety. Then there are those who don't care about regulations, but still without malicious intent. This is the group that we need to focus on, to educate, make them understand why do we have regulations and how to follow them. The second group is bad guys, terrorists, criminals, which have malicious intent, and there are different entities which should focus on these people. And if we focus too much on this group, then we should have to ban any unmanned aircraft system, as well as many other technologies and things in our lives. A couple of years ago, I wouldn't believe that a heavy truck can cause serious damage to people, but now we have to fight against heavy trucks driving inside big crowds. As I said, we have to focus on those people who do not have malicious intent. And my daily job is related to the flight safety, and I will try to focus only on this safety aspect. And when we talk about the safety, we have to define the risks which are acceptable. The target level of safety for different unmanned aircraft system operations should be the same. What I mean, if we look at two types of risks: air risk and ground risk. First, we should make sure that we avoid mid-air collisions. And second, we should be sure that there are no serious or fatal injuries on the ground. And no matter what or how we operate the unmanned aircraft, it is about the way how we achieve it. To explain it a little bit more, currently in Latvia we have regulatory framework how to operate unmanned aircraft systems. But as the time flies by, we have to start talking about the upcoming European regulation, which will be in force starting from the next year. This regulation has a risk-based approach, and all unmanned aircraft operations are divided in three categories. First category is so-called open category with relatively low risks. Second group is specific category, and the third group is certified category where the risks are really high. And how can we reach this level of safety? For example, the open category has its restrictions and limitations. You can fly unmanned aircraft up to 120 meters by keeping safe distance from the people, and it depends on the weight of your unmanned aircraft. The maximum takeoff weight is limited to 25 kilos, and one of the main restrictions in open category is that you have to keep unmanned aircraft within visual line of sight to avoid collisions with other airspace users or objects or people on the ground. In addition to these limitations, there will be additional restrictions, additional so-called UAS geographical zones, which are designed and developed based on risk assessment, taking into account not only the safety aspects, but security, privacy, and environmental as well. So we can hear there are lots of restrictions, right? In addition to that, all remote pilots are required to have at least online training and examination. All UAS operators will be required to register themselves, and unmanned aircraft used in this open category will need to follow the requirements set out in regulation for the manufacturers to make sure that their airworthiness and functions are good enough to be operated in this open category. And one of the main functions, interesting functions, which is introduced with this regulation is so-called remote identification. Again, a lot of restrictions, a lot of limitations, but if we want to derogate from any of these restrictions, if we want to do something more, then we need additional ways how to mitigate risks and how to prove that the level of safety is, we keep the same level of safety, 10-6. We can take BVLOS operation as an example. BVLOS operation falls into specific category. In this operation, remote pilot is not able to see unmanned aircraft and the airspace around it. Therefore, he or she is simply not able to do actions to avoid collisions. To allow such operations, we need to have additional means to mitigate risks. Regulations require all aircraft, manned or unmanned aircraft, to remain well clear from and avoid collisions with other airspace users. And when we talk about the BVLOS operation, this is one of the key problems. How to make sure that unmanned aircraft will stay clear from any other airspace user. We all know what the VFR and IFR are. That's great, but the problem is that these regulations were written taking into account that pilot is within the cockpit. With unmanned aircraft, we can simply not follow these rules. And yes, again, we need alternative means of compliance. For visual line of sight operations, we can say that yes, it's the acceptable means of compliance to follow visual flight rules, because remote pilot sees the aircraft, he or she sees the airspace around it, and everything is good. This is one of the ways how to mitigate risks in BVLOS operations. If we have additional observers, visual or airspace observers, looking for the flight trajectory, looking about the threats around the unmanned aircraft, and if they notice something, they can inform a remote pilot so he or she can take the actions. In this case, you need to have additional training how to inform the remote pilot. You have to document how this communication is done, and then the operation might be considered as safe enough. The second way how to do the BVLOS operations is to fully segregate the area, reserve the airspace for the unmanned aircraft operation so that no other aircraft is there. And then again, we can say that we can give the exemption for this requirement to detect and avoid other aircraft. But in real life, it doesn't work. It's too restrictive, and the operations are not scalable. Everyone wants to be integrated in aviation industry and to be integrated in one common airspace. But even if we segregate the unmanned aircraft, or we don't segregate, it doesn't matter. One more challenge that we are facing is how to make sure that the unmanned aircraft stays within predefined flight geography. And even if something goes wrong and we activate contingency procedures, how to make sure that it doesn't fly further away than predefined contingency volume. There are different ways how to integrate unmanned aircraft. We have, if we talk about the air risks, we have 3 risk mitigation layers. First one is strategic mitigation layer, where the airspace is designed based on the risk assessment. So we know where the aircraft are flying, what's the flight intensity. The time component is also very important. Second, we talk about the pre-tactical mitigation layer, where we define and give the information, geo-awareness information, which is static, but at least remote pilots know where they are allowed to fly and where they are not. We have to provide the information in real time. It's also very important. And the third layer is about dynamic geo-awareness. So if any other aircraft or airspace user enters the airspace, which they are not allowed to enter, you still get the information about them, and we do not have to segregate the area without a reason. For example, if the operation takes only 5 minutes, we don't have to segregate the area for a whole day. We can segregate it in much less time and in dimensions. And when we look at the legal framework, my final remarks, one may say it's too permissive or too simple. The others may say, no, it's too restrictive, too complex. It really depends on the point of view. Industry will always like to do operations in a more sophisticated way than the regulations are ready for. Regulators will always try to restrict everything to stay on the safe side. Both sides need to understand that safety is always first, and we both have to work on it. But one thing I'm sure about is that our current approach with manual and paperwork, nothing will work. Let's be honest, my presentation was quite boring because I tried to explain the theory behind all this regulatory process. And I truly believe that this theory can be turned into real life only if all these processes are digitalized and automated. And again, this digitalization and automation brings new set of challenges for the aviation industry because this is something new. And there are already different legal frameworks. One of them in Europe is so-called airspace concept. We can call it whatever you want, USpace, UTM, or anything else. There are simple steps that we need to follow. It's the risk assessment, registration, information about other airspace users, simple access to the airspace, simple way how to request the authorization, simple way how to authorize flights, and how to exchange the information. And this is the things that we are working on. And if you have any questions regarding this process, I will be more than happy to answer during the panel of discussions. Thank you for your time, and fly safe.